All right, you intrepid Herle Burlyites. So just a little bit of a shake-up in the U.S. this week, hey? Well, if you're expecting a pity party here, you won't get it. Nothing but analysis. If you're a fan of our air quotes media universe, you know that we've had the masterful Keith Boag covering this election for the last 3 months, filing his written analysis on the Trump-Harris campaign weekly to our quotes page on the website. Keith's a friend of the pod, a four-time guest here, a legend with the CBC for more than 30 years as Chief Political Correspondent, much of that time working in Washington, D.C. He stood witness to several elections down there, observing and reporting on the discourse, an upending of political norms. Upending may be an understatement. And that's where we're going to go with this conversation. I want to concentrate on two broad themes. What the hell happened and what the hell happens next? So Keith, my friend, my buddy, fellow air quotes contributor, welcome back to the Herle Burly. Good to see you.
Thank you. Can I just say, I think this is my 7th appearance on the Herle Burly. Onward.
Yes, awesome.
Really.
Well, my God. That's more. That deserves more than a shirt. We're gonna have to get you a hoodie or something like that.
Or a car.
That's Oprah's job. I read all your pieces.
Wow, thank you. I appreciate that.
I do, and they were very insightful. Except that they didn't leave me with the impression of the result that occurred on Tuesday night.
Right.
So, what went differently than you were expecting?
Well, I would say one of them may have hinted that this was not in the bag, which was early on when I think I wrote about Kamala Harris being the underdog. And then we saw some kind of a bounce through the convention for a little bit. And we saw her have a good debate, and we should have noticed and paid more attention to the fact that didn't do her a bit of good. And the race stayed where it was, which appeared to be tight. So at no point was I ever going to feel that this was in the bag for her.
Right.
And people had asked me to say what I thought was going to happen, and I just steadfastly refused because I still had a kind of PTSD from 2016. But nothing that I saw through the campaign indicated what we were going to see on election night. And so it was, first of all, true for, I would say, the vast majority of people, and possibly even including Donald Trump. And it was a shock.
It looks like it was a shock to the Democrats too, eh?
Well, I mean, it's so different from what happened in 2016 in terms of a result. And
in the sense of being much more decisive.
Much more decisive. I think one thing I did say in one of my pieces was that, suggesting that he could win, but it seemed almost impossible that he would win also the popular vote. And that's what's really different this time. Through the Trump election cycles, plural, including midterms and so on, I have said on this show and many times in other places that Donald Trump is a turnout machine for both parties, but he turns out Democrats more than he turns out Republicans consistently. And that has been true up until Tuesday night, 2024. The results are stunning in that respect.
He's been normalized in the sense, right? There's not the same horror at the prospect of him among large swaths of the population as there was in 2016.
And how did that happen? Because there should be more. Because the experience of Trump, in my view, was worse than what had been expected. And it became worse on January 6th, 2021. Nothing in my imagination had prepared me for what we saw on that day. And nothing in my imagination prepared me for what we would learn about what he was up to on that day. And I mean, it doesn't get more horrifying than that. That's, people talk about him being president. That is certainly the opposite of presidential, right? but it's a scary, scary thing to see that the leader of the free world is supporting the overthrow of a legitimate election in his own country. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Okay. Now, we're going to complicate this thing, but before we complicate it, can we just look at whether it's really simple? Is this more than just a challenger beating an incumbent in a bad economy? I mean, incumbents are losing everywhere, right? In the Western world, they're everywhere. They're in trouble everywhere or losing everywhere. So, I mean, is this anything more than just that?
I think if you wanted to have only one explanation and not complicate it, you would have to settle on the fact that the elites and the people running the government did not appreciate what was happening in the economy as it was being felt by the people who were living through it. They depended instead on a macroeconomic analysis. They got high on their own supply. This is the best economy in the world. The recovery from the COVID era economy is well underway. We have record low unemployment. Interest rates are going to come down. Inflation is going to come down, totally ignoring the fact that prices were still going up and that people experience the economy through prices, not through any of that data. So if you're looking for one single explanation, I don't see how you could ignore that one. But I think there are other stuff going on too.
Herle Burlyites, as a refreshing change of pace here, I'm going to start with the conclusion. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, wants the widespread escalation of copper theft in Canada to end. The only way that's going to happen is if we pay more attention to it. Deterrence measures are heightened, and all levels of government join with industry to fix this massive issue and safeguard our essential services. So now, let's take a few steps back. I want to tell you how the crime happens in the first place and make it clear to everyone how the impacts of copper theft can put lives at risk. During road upgrade projects, thieves will arrive at night in pickup trucks, attach the wire on site, and just start driving. It results in an average loss of 800 meters of wire at a time. Or there's aerial theft. Somebody climbs a telecom pole and cuts a section of wire. It falls to the ground, they slice it up into smaller pieces and haul it away. Or thieves will crawl under manhole covers out of sight and cut copper lines, which is especially dangerous because of other ground wires under there that can kill. So it's a problem, eh? One that harms critical services, compromises public safety, erodes customer trust, strains resources, and impacts communities. Thefts and vandalism like these have resulted in the loss of over 200 million minutes of total outage time for major incidents, with over 170,000 customer impacts since 2021. Whole communities are losing their ability to connect to everything. Next week, a ray of light, some best practices examples, how government and providers in other countries are collaborating to combat the issue and target these bad actors. Despite all of his meandering and his weaving, as he calls it, in his speeches, I knew what Trump was promising me. Trump was promising me a better economy, lower taxes, and a sealed-up border. What was the Harris promise? As the voter, what was the deliverable I was supposed to get from Harris?
You were going to get women were going to get their right to control their reproductive freedom back. And men were going to appreciate that as well, she was telling us, because men were sensitive on that issue. But on the other stuff, she never had a good argument because there wasn't a good argument. There wasn't a good argument for a secure border in her history. And so it was difficult to persuade people they'd have a secure border in their future with her. The economy, the way I have already described the economy was the burden that she had to bear. She had to, late in the game, talk to people in the language that they understood about how they were feeling the economy in their own lives and not how economists were feeling the economy for them. So she had headwinds, the same headwinds that Joe Biden had to face, she had to face too. And from running many campaigns, those are stiff headwinds. When you're going against inflation and prices are up and continuing up, you're on a losing campaign from the start.
So they were campaigning on issues that were of secondary importance, not primary importance to people. The polling shows that even the women who voted for Harris thought the economy was a more important issue than choice. Mm-hmm. Right? I don't know whether she didn't have anything to say. I mean, Biden, as a president, seemed to me to be determinedly trying to reorient the Democratic Party away from its 3-decade support of neoliberalism and go back to a more traditional Democrat positioning. He was a supporter of unions and trying to strengthen unions. He was investing in the public massively. He was forgiving student loan debt. He was an infrastructure guy. He couldn't sell that because of his obvious frailty, etc. He couldn't sell it, but she didn't even try to sell it.
Well, not only that, but they're getting undercut by labor. And I don't want to dodge your question. I think it's right. Like she was given so many tasks. The first one of which was, you've got to tell people who you are. Mm-hmm. And she did that in terms of giving her personal story. And I think that was good. I think people needed to hear her personal story. But the other story she needed to tell them was who she was in terms of how she saw herself as a leader and the priorities that she was going to have as the president. And that's where she needed to embrace what, I mean, I as I think you know, embrace wholeheartedly that we are in the change of, this is a change moment in terms of not just government, but in terms of the economic and social orthodoxies of the last 40 some years, which is neoliberalism. People don't like that name sometimes. Call it whatever you want. That's what it is. You know, the inarguable, undebatable belief that the free movement of goods and people and capital and information across borders was a good thing. And the complete blindness to the fact that people were suffering from that. The one thing that makes me hesitate.
So there was a bipartisan consensus about that in the country until Trump came along.
Exactly.
So people that opposed those policies had no voice in the political process.
No.
Right? And now Trump gave them a choice. And now that has left the Democrats and Harris defending the status quo, right? They're the status quo party. They are the defenders of the system. And what are they defending? Are they defending those trade deals that hollowed out middle America? Are they defending that porous border? What are they defending?
Which ones? Because I think you were suggesting that Joe Biden was defending the kind of America that may have been the vision of a Lyndon Johnson, where the government is deeply involved, not a neoliberal stance at all. Government is deeply involved in doing things for people. But in
this election, I heard no hint from Harris that there was legitimacy to the economic complaints of the citizens.
I did think, though, that, and maybe you agree, that there was a lot of elite opinion, again, that the Democratic Party had drifted too far to the left, and that Harris's task, therefore, was to bring it back to where they perceived the center to be. And that seems to run contrary to the idea that you have to challenge the orthodoxies of the last 40 years. So, I mean, you know, I hate to say it, but does she know what she thinks about these things when she's in a campaign? Does she know what she can afford to think about these things when she's in a campaign? Or is she really saying what she thinks? In which case, then she accepts more of the responsibility for failing to deliver the message that people wanted to hear. But I also think it's important to point out that wherever this is happening, it seems to me conservatives have got to that conclusion first, either whether it's through Donald Trump or whether it's through, you know, dragging the Conservative Party in the UK into a referendum on the European Union, or whatever is happening in Canada that has led the Conservative Party to choose Pierre Poilievre. What is happening generally is that the party is rebranding itself from the party of here, Bay Street, to the party of Main Street, from the party of Wall Street to the party of Main Street, from the party of the city to the party of Main Street. And that used to be Democrats, liberals, Labor's Street. And they're being cleared out of it.
Totally. The Conservatives and the Republicans were the party of smokers' jackets and monogrammed slippers.
The Country Club Republicans.
Right. And now they don't want, you know, the Harris's vote went up in, I think, 3 micro demographics, and one of them was white people who make more than $200,000 a year.
Yay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a problem. I mean, another thing that has interested me is how deeply committed Trump is to the idea of tariffs, and knowing that it provokes ridicule from the elites and the chattering classes. But again, I think he might be ahead of, protectionism is making some kind of a comeback. It can't, we can't be talking about rigid protectionism that amounts to mercantilism or something, but we need to have some kind of antidote to what has happened because of this, even I hate to say neoliberalism, but it is a convenient term. There has to be an answer to that. And I think that I think you're finding in conservative circles that there are more sophisticated arguments about protectionism and tariffs that go beyond just dismissing it as a stupid idea because Trump doesn't understand who pays for them. That is such a red herring. I mean, understanding why people think those things are important is much more vital to the conversation than dismissing them.
Well, yeah, I think they're putting workers back at the center of economic policy as opposed to capital.
I think it was a big deal that they had the president of the Teamsters Union speak at a Republican convention, say that there are new kinds of Republicans in the party that are reaching out to us and we're reaching back, and to name them. And one of the ones he names is the senator from Ohio, J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, right? Yeah. That's a meaningful thing. Whether you like it or not, whether you think it makes sense or not, is irrelevant. It's what's happening.
Right.
Sorry. I wouldn't be like this.
I like to look up words, figure out where they came from. And you'd be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, to know how many come from railroading. Blowing your stack, for example. It originally referred to relieving the pressure inside a locomotive engine by releasing steam through the overhead exhaust or stack. Ditto, letting off steam. Ditto, blowing smoke. Train tracks gave us all sorts of expressions. Backtrack, on the wrong track, sidetracked, staying on track. Something you bought is just the ticket? Guess where that originated? Or tunnel vision, or light at the end of the tunnel. You can look up the term railroaded. You can make the grade. You might have bought a new car with all the bells and whistles. A political third rail. I could go on. Anyway, the folks at our sponsor CN have one particular favorite term at the moment. Leaving the station on time. But they mean it literally. In the past few years, leaving the station on time and arriving on time has become a prime CN directive. It's actually more complicated than it sounds. Leaving the station on time means making sure the tracks ahead are clear, precisely coordinating the dozens of mile-and-a-half-long trains rolling along the network at any given moment, and making sure they can unload and reload efficiently at the end of the line. Whoops, see what I did there? Anyway, as a result, the velocity of CN's trains hasn't been as good in years. To most of the world, velocity means speed, but to a railway, it means the average number of miles its trains cover in a day. And what that crucial number means is good service, as in, making the trains run on time. Where service is concerned, CN has, yes, wait for it, a one-track mind. Hey, what role did gender play in this race? I have never, I don't think, seen in my life a campaign where one party so explicitly said, we're the party of women, and another party said, we're the party of men. How do you think that ultimately played out?
Certainly not the way the party of women thought it was going to play out.
Right.
Listen, one of the things I keep, when this comes up, I remember just one little kind of streeter interview I did in Florida in 2016, which was the Puerto Rican community just south of Orlando. I'm talking to a guy there, and maybe I've told you this story before, who tells me that he can't vote for Donald Trump because Donald Trump's a racist, but he can't vote for Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton's a woman.
Yeah.
How do you get to that kind of thinking about racism without somehow going past questions of women in society? I just don't know. But they do it. I mean, they do it. I don't know. I'm a little bit dodging the question because I don't think we know enough yet, or maybe you do, about which women stayed home. I mean, so many people who didn't vote. That's, to me, that is sort of the headline. That 14, they're missing 14 million votes, and obviously there are people who are going to say that's because the election was fixed. And
well, to paraphrase Blazing Saddles, where were the white women at?
Yeah, and that's what it's come to. We're paraphrasing Blazing Saddles now. No, but you don't have to think it's a Russian conspiracy to fix the election to wonder where 14 million votes went and why. Right.
Well, where do you think what happened to that turnout? We were anticipating, we were told there was going to be a flood of women, right? That they were storming the barricades, and certainly the Democratic campaign in the last week was all set up to do that. Like, what else was the purpose of Michelle Obama lecturing us like that?
Absolutely,
right?
Doubling down and tripling down, and man, oh man. And I remember, I was texting people like, this is not an accident. Like women are they're going to save her.
Yeah,
they're going to come out. They're more reliable voters, and there are lots of them, and they're angry. So here's something that's bothered me through the whole campaign, which is how come Republicans were smart enough to spend $30 million on 30,000 runs of a TV ad against transgender policies, and the Democrats were not smart enough to understand that that Republicans were seeing something that they were not seeing. And I've had it explained to me by, not personally, but by consuming media and so on, that Democrats did not recognize, maybe soon enough, how suburban women responded to that. Suburban white women responded to that ad. Right. And if those women were Democrats and they couldn't stand Donald Trump, then abortion was a voting issue for them. It may have just canceled out their desire to vote, because it's the kind of issue where you may have an opinion about it that leads you to believe this woman doesn't understand me at all. She doesn't understand my life or my family or what that issue means to me. And you've completely broken the bond. I don't know, but I'm probably more interested in that ad and that decision than any other. I mentioned it earlier in the campaign in one of my pieces because they started doing it in September out of the blue. And if I remember correctly, transgender issues were on a list. They were number 22 in terms of concerns among voters. And suddenly they rocketed up the spending list for Republicans in terms of where they put their ad money to, in some cases, second place, in some cases, third. And when it was in second place, it was ahead of the border. The economy was always number one. And then you saw like this transgender ad attracting all kinds of money from the Republican campaign. And you have to think, well, nobody could possibly think that's an accident. It means they're seeing something there that they think they can exploit.
I wonder if part of the answer isn't the fact that the entire political establishment, both Republican and Democrat, has nothing but contempt for Trump and his operation, right? So whether you're reading last week in the campaign article in The Atlantic about what a shambolic disaster the Trump campaign is internally, or whether you're listening to Mike Murphy and David Axelrod cackle every week about how stupid the Trump campaign is, I don't think it would have occurred to anybody that they were actually onto something.
No, I did both those things, listening to Hacks on Tap and reading Tim Alberta in The Atlantic. And the Tim Alberta piece described a campaign that was familiar to me in an important sense. I've covered a lot of campaigns. And when you're on the bus and on the plane, you know the difference between a winning campaign and a losing campaign. You can almost taste it in the air, right? And that's what I got from Tim Alberta's piece. And I said that to people as a way of, I guess, expressing some confidence in their belief that the Trump campaign was in serious trouble. And maybe it was, maybe they are surprised at how it turned out too. But it kind of also suggests that maybe they're just used to working like that. Like those people who have been around Trump for a long time have seen this movie over and over and over again. And perhaps they just know how to deal with it now, and they don't react to it. And me reacting to it as though it's any other campaign is stupid. There, I said it.
There you said it. So the transgender issue takes us back to the age-old question about how much of this divide between the Democrats and Republicans and their voters is economic, as we were discussing earlier, and how much of it is cultural. Because transgender, is an issue that affects almost nobody. But nonetheless, it feels like something that you ought to have an opinion on, and differentiates certain types of people from other types of people. So when you look at that map and you look at the coasts and the interior and you look at rural versus cities, there's obviously still a massive cultural divide between these two parties that was at play in this election.
For sure. In the recent past, going back to Obama, the economy was a kind of peculiar issue because unless there was something obvious happening in the economy, as there was in 2020, that nobody could deny, and that has continued up until this election, generally, your view of the economy aligned with your cultural views of the country, right? It was kind of crazy, as though, there was an Obama economy, and then, in most of the Trump term, there was a Trump economy, and people had completely different views on the economy, depending on their political,
partisanship. Yeah.
Their partisanship, which was largely shaped by their cultural beliefs. I think that disappeared in this campaign, and that there was an agreement on the economy. And people can generally agree. The other thing about it that's vitally important is that people agree when the economy is bad. They disagree when it's any other way, any other way at all. And so people are brought together when the economy is bad as they perceive it to be now because of prices, as we've talked about. And then sort of one cultural side maintains its cultural, or they both maintain their cultural differences, but the economic argument moves and joins with the people who are experiencing the economy as it is and can answer the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago, with a resounding no.
Yeah. To address our housing crisis, Canada needs to build 6 million new homes by 2030. We know we need to build them quickly, but how can we also build them responsibly, using sustainable materials that help our economy, communities, and the environment? Here's how Canada's forest sector is helping. While wood has long been used as a construction material, the benefits of using wood as the primary material in the construction of mid- and high-rise buildings is increasingly being recognized as a more sustainable option. Modular wood-based building systems reduce the waste, noise, labor, and time required to erect a structure, a significant advantage for building projects quickly in densely populated areas. They also require less energy to heat and cool long-term, creating more affordable, more sustainable housing options in our cities. By updating building codes and incentivizing modular wood-based construction, government can maximize the benefits our forests present to solve our housing crisis in a sustainable way. We need to unlock the potential of our forests by empowering architects and developers with the incentives and ability to use mass timber and wood-based solutions in construction. In a time when our world is changing, it is essential that our government recognize some of the most powerful tools we have, sustainably managed forests and the products we can make from them. Our world is changing, so is Canadian forestry. It's time for our thinking to change with it. For more information, visit forestryforthefuture.ca. One of the things I think about, Keith, is that this wasn't one election, it was two. And I watched media that mocked every Trump utterance and openly cheered for Harris. But I presume there was an alternative universe out there where people were consuming media in which the assassination attempts on Trump were serious things, which his concerns about the border were taken deadly seriously, where the Democrats are the threat to democracy, not Trump, and where Harris is an inauthentic word salad spinner. And so just saw the election entirely differently, with entirely different inputs.
I think that's true, and I saw it really on social media, because so much of the mainstream media is on the other side of that argument, right? The easiest point of access for me is through social media now. One of the things, and you and I have talked about this before, that I've been thinking about is the assassination attempt, or both of them, but particularly the first one, because it was such an iconic moment. And I wonder now, and I suspect,
but in my world, it disappeared immediately.
But I think in Trump world, it had an impact on how people saw January 6th and the indictment of Trump on for the insurrection. And that all of those things are one. They are all about Donald Trump.
They're out to get him.
Fighting for you. They're out to get him, and he's fighting for you. And, you know, I don't know anybody who doesn't think that moment, that iconic moment when he's standing there with his fist in the air, yelling, fight, 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 wasn't enormously powerful and hard to argue against. Yeah. And if you can meld that into an idea that this person is constantly in the line of fire on our behalf and doing the hard things, sure, why wouldn't you forgive him for trying to overthrow the government? You know, even though I say that, I still can't really believe it, but I kind of think it's true anyway. You know, when people want to see something a certain way and something like that comes along to help them see it that way, they will grab it.
What do you make of, I mean, does character not matter at all anymore? Like, I mean, his behavior throughout this campaign, and I'm just going to be honest. I come from working class background. My parents had nothing, right? And they lived in a small rural village. They are the kind of people that are currently voting for Trump. But he represents everything that I was taught is bad in people as character. A braggart, a liar, a cheater, a boor, potentially a rapist, right? And that doesn't seem to matter to people anymore. I mean, he called Nancy Pelosi a bitch in his last rally, right? And I'm pretty sure that my mother could have agreed with a politician on every conceivable policy issue and not voted for them if they did that. What's happened there?
I think different things have happened to different people, and I certainly don't have the definitive answer to this. But one of the things that I know has happened is that in a certain part of the community, there's this belief that you may not recognize the Lord when he comes to you again. He may be in disguise, and the talent you will have is your ability to see through all of that and know that it's him. You know, like, I'm not maybe using the right words, and I hope I'm not offending anybody by having chosen the wrong words. But what I'm just trying to convey is that there's a way in which you can frame that it becomes evidence of his virtue, unbelievably. Evidence of his virtue. And I don't know how many people are affected by that, and how many people who think that the stakes are just so damn high that you have to put up with this stuff. And the stakes, in their view, are they're losing their country. Anybody can walk into it now, legally or illegally, take my job and change my culture. And we have no choice. Our backs are against the wall, and this guy seems to know how to deal with it.
Right. So it's just
straight
straight trade-off.
I wouldn't accept that behavior from my kids, but the president of the United States, you know, he's got a different job to do.
Okay. My last backward-looking question, because we do want to move forward a little bit, but my last backward-looking question is, for some reason, at some point in this campaign, I found myself looking at the electoral map from 1960. Kennedy versus Nixon.
Okay.
Right? And it is entirely different. California and New York and New Jersey are swing states.
Yeah.
Right? California is won by the Republicans. Right? There's still that Dixiecrat thing along the South. So there's Democrats winning Louisiana and Georgia and places like that. But what you don't have is blue on each side of the map and red all the way through the middle. You have a much more interchanged thing than that. So, but now we really do have this middle America versus the two coasts. What's the underlying dynamic there?
Well, I think you've seen it in the extremism of the Republican Party, because while I agree with you that it looks like red in the middle, it's way more red in the south of that middle than in the north of that middle. Right. And you know the history of the South in terms of its political alignment.
Yep.
And that is that it was solidly Democratic until we went into the 1960s. And for complicated reasons that were important at the time and are still, the Democratic Party became the party of civil rights and also of immigration from countries that were not white. And that is when it began to lose the South, because that, I'm looking for the politest way to put it, that does not align with the values of the South as they were in the 1960s. And I think that has persisted in a way that has made it darker red and spread it out and has become a kind of regenerative culture of that point of view over decades, so that now you have people pushed into corners of the country where there is a kind of hegemonic view of the political world and the culture, and others pushed out to the coasts, and they take the opposite view. What is so strange about it to me, I mean, there are a lot of things that are strange about it, but, you know, they often want to play the haves and the have-nots things in the U.S., and a lot of those red states are supported by the blue states, right? And I don't know if that generates resentment because of the truth of it, or whether they're just ignorant of the truth of it, you know?
Oh, I'm sure they're ignorant of it.
But, you know, like I drive
people
through Alabama,
who live in parts of Canada who are recipients of equalization often don't accept that to be the legitimate point of view.
I drive through Alabama, and the roads are beautiful and smooth and black and just wonderful. And they go right past a campus for NASA. Like, what do they think NASA is? Right? And what's it doing in Alabama? Well, somebody paid to put it there, you know? Yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry, that's a bit of a divergence. But the problem with the problem with what you're deciding is that the color gets so dense, whether it's blue or red, that the culture becomes pervasive. And when the culture becomes pervasive, it loses touch with the other culture in the country. And I think that that is one of many reasons, but it's an important reason that the U.S. is as polarized into tribally polarized as it is today.
Yeah. Okay, so he won. He's going to be the president. Who are going to be the key personnel in his administration? Do we have any idea about that? Because it feels like it will be different this time.
Yeah.
I don't expect people like Rex Tillerson to be part of this administration.
No, but you know who else I don't expect to be part of this mission is the Kushners.
Right.
And so why is that important? It's not because of their intellect or their political persuasion, although it might be to a degree. They were a center of power. And one of the complicating things about the first Trump White House that made it just a nest of vipers was that it had way too many centers of power, right? That were at war with each other almost constantly, and sometimes at war within themselves. And I think that that'll be cut down significantly, but that some of the people returning who were centers of power in the last White House will be some of the strongest personalities. I think that, like, Steve Bannon is back for a way.
Is he?
I think so. Yeah, I think that he's wormed his way back over time, and I think because Ivanka and Jared are gone, I think two of his main antagonists will be gone too, which will, he'll be fine with that.
But is he going to surround himself with a bunch of grifters and shit? Like, the kinds of people, Scaramucci's and these kinds of people he's brought in before? Or are we going to see some disciplined army march in from the Heritage Foundation and implement Project 2025?
I think that. Sure, he's dismissed. Of course, he's going to dismiss Project 2025. He has no problem with saying one thing one day and another thing the next. None at all. If you look at Project 2025, there's a lot in it that wouldn't interest him anyway, and that he may not take up. But you can bet he's going to be interested in politicizing the public service, and want to know how you do that. All they have to do is sell him on his favorite word. You need a public service that's loyal to you, right? Who thinks he's going to go, no, wait, that's not right for the American people? Nobody thinks that.
Right.
So, and that is a huge thing, right? Because if you can do something like that, even at a smaller scale than described in Project 2025, which is a very large scale, even if you can do it on a smaller scale, that's a way of really creating a culture in the civil service that becomes an extension of what, sure, Donald Trump wants too, but the much broader interests of the Heritage Foundation.
Right.
I don't know if people, I don't have a lot of sense of who is going to be in his cabinet. I don't think many people have thought a lot about it. But you're starting to hear some names, and there haven't been any names that I've heard that have made me go, well, there's an adult. Bob Lighthizer maybe, but there are lots of reasons to be fearful of Bob Lighthizer. He was the U.S. Trade Commissioner.
Yep.
I'm explaining for the audience that just in case you don't know, he was involved in the renegotiation of NAFTA into what it's called now, and he is somebody who might be on the list for Treasury Board, Treasurer, U.S. Secretary.
Okay.
But what I find interesting about that, and I say this wherever I can, is that a little background reading on him, and his latest interest, I think, is in outside of trade, what else can you do to regain your manufacturing base and so on. And I think that he is kind of enthusiastic about currency manipulation and devaluing the US dollar. And imagine the impact on Canada of a devalued US dollar. We're very sensitive to a couple of cents change, from week to week, or if it's sustained from month to month or year to year. It makes a huge difference. And if it's done deliberately with a target in mind, that's not only going to have repercussions in the economy and be difficult to deal with. It's going to upset the relationship between Canada and the United States because of the deliberateness of it. So I would worry about that.
Investments. Our listeners know it's something that comes up often on this pod, whether we're talking about Canada's productivity crisis and the desire for more investments in our economy, the AI boom and recent investments to be made in the upcoming fall economic statement, or my emotional investments in rum, Coke, the Riders, Elton, or twisty cheese-covered snack foods. But we don't talk nearly enough about our own personal investments, when that probably matters most to Canadians' long-term financial wellness. Our new sponsor, Fidelity Investments Canada, is going to change that for us. We'll be talking openly about money over the course of the next 10 episodes. And maybe make our mothers mad, because we'll be discussing two of the three things we were taught to avoid in polite conversation: politics, money, and religion. So who is Fidelity? With over $250 billion in assets under management, they're a mutual fund and ETF firm in Canada with a simple mission for its over 2 million individual investors and institutional investors: to build better financial futures for Canadians by aiming to deliver investment performance that we can all count on, because performance matters. Stay tuned for the next installment from Fidelity on the latest retail investment trends. Well, so speaking of Canadian interests, there's a lot of talk about how Canada has already been working on and will work on again, building a Team Canada approach, using federal government, provincial governments, other influencers in Canada to reach out to governors and members of Congress and educate them about the trade relationship and ring-fence Trump. Ring-fence Trump with all these other interests that prevent him from doing to Canada what he's promising to do. Seemed to work last time, but I'm skeptical this time for some reason.
Well, that argument would align very well with an argument that says this is not the time for a change. We need a team on the ground that's experienced, that's been through this before. Who could that be? But that doesn't mean that there isn't truth to the argument, that we have seen how it was been managed before. I was living in the US then. I did not have a lot of contact with or sense of how people in Canada regarded the way in which the Trudeau government managed that. But my impression is that they were pretty pleased with it, that they generally thought that it was a very difficult thing to manage a person like Trump and an administration like his, and that the Trudeau team did a good job. I mean,
but isn't Trump determined to be different this time? That's what I understood was the case, that Trump felt like he was too constrained in his first term. And he listened to too many of those interests, and he didn't get done what he wanted to get done. So why am I unpersuaded that Gretchen Whitmer is going to convince him that the trading relationship between Ontario and Michigan is too serious to jeopardize with a tariff?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not in the business of defending Trump. No, I think that everybody should understand that this is not that Trump 2.0 is not an extension of Trump 1.0 with new features. It's very likely a very different program altogether, where he understands that the biggest mistake in his own mind is that he listened to too many people who disagreed with him. And he'll have enough of that this time. He's going to have a lot of people there who are going to try to figure out what he thinks and get there first, or who are going to listen to him and just reinforce all of his prejudices. And I think that's going to be something that you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. But it's not going to be easy to knock him off his game as it was before. I mean, I think that Trump, if he ever has private thoughts in his little interior self, must recognize that his first administration was an utter failure when it's compared to the platform that he ran on and the promises that he made. He knows there's no wall on the border, right? He knows he didn't get rid of Obamacare, and now he can't. And so he might have a little bit of a prise de conscience, like Pierre Trudeau did when he got back into office, having been expelled by Joe Clark. Yep. He wasn't going to fool around this time. He had some things he wanted to do, and they may be politically catastrophic, but he's doing them because he believes in them. And I think that, God, it's weird to make that kind of and lead it right into Donald Trump, because Donald Trump's no Pierre Trudeau. But I think that it's perfectly reasonable to believe that that sentiment is going to preoccupy Donald Trump for 4 years. That is so weird. Like, does he think in terms of legacy? God, he's going to be, he's 78 years old. Who doesn't? Well, so all of that to say, I think he may be more determined to realize his visions than he was in his first term, when he could be talked out of things and was talked out of things by more sensible people. So he won't have those sensible people around, and he will be more determined than he ever was.
Yeah. He's already one of the most consequential American political figures in a very, very long time. I'd say he's the defining figure of the 21st century at this point. If not him, then probably some terrorist somewhere, but not another world leader, Yeah. Quickly, Ukraine. It looks like they're probably going to have to negotiate for peace now and give up some territory or something like that. You go ahead.
I think that's what we should expect. If it were any other international problem, you could still hold out some hope that Trump would be educated into a different response. But this is about Putin. And he is so invested in Putin. I mean that like in every sense, like emotionally invested in Putin and almost slavishly devoted to his style. And I think that's a near insurmountable problem.
Why did Americans lose interest in supporting Ukraine? Is it because of the long-standing strain of isolationism and avoidance of foreign entanglements in American opinion? Or is it financial that people resent sending all the money there? Because, I mean, it's not a war for America. They're not like losing troops. They're just sending over weapons. Why? And to fight Russia. Like, why is that not a popular thing in America? And it is not a popular thing anymore in America.
I think that there's an audience for Trump's message that you're being played for suckers. I think there's an intellectual argument. You know, all of these things at some point, some of the most dastardly things that have ever happened in the history of the world need an intellectual framework to sell them, right? And I think the intellectual framework in this case is that we started it. It's actually all our fault. It's, you know, it always has been a part of Russia. It still is a part of Russia. It's a territorial dispute within what should be their own borders. I'm not endorsing any of this at all, but I'm saying that's the predicate for the argument. And then we made things
NATO
worse.
got aggressive.
That's the next thing. NATO got aggressive. What do you expect them to do? You're right on their borders. And I think if you supply people with that argument, and they're not really that interested in Ukraine to begin with, but they see Trump as being on another side of it, and they don't really care that much about Putin. I think it's easy to embrace that kind of feeling and say, why are we sending our hard-earned dollars over there? And not even considering that those hard-earned dollars that go over there actually turn right around and come back to the U.S. and get reinvested in their country. And that war has always been a great business for the U.S. to be into, and that's just a fact, right?
Yeah. So where do the Democrats go from here? I mean, they seem really out of touch with the electorate, as we've been discussing throughout this entire show. Yeah. I presume that much of the establishment of that party is now discredited with their own members and their own voters. I presume that the left is emboldened to try to yank the party in the direction of Bernie Sanders and AOC, and that the other forces in the party will be weakened in their ability to fight that. So what do you, I mean, are they in disarray right now as much as it looks to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first place they go to is therapy, right? And this is like just probably the most horrible moment they could imagine, right? Like so much worse than 2016. But there's no doubt that that part of the party that supported Bernie Sanders in 2016 and again in 2020 will say, and with some justification, we told you so. We told you what was happening. We told you who you had to pay attention to, and we told you who not to pay attention to, and you would not listen. Okay. And, you know, I mean, Trump and Sanders were the renegades within their respective parties who had many, on a Venn diagram, there were a lot of overlaps in the middle between what they were saying. You know, Sanders without the racism and inciting the rage among people, right? That was different, but they were talking about what has happened under this thing that we were talking about earlier, which is 4 decades of neoliberalism. That's what they were talking about. Right. And there was a tremendous resonance for that, right? And I mean, what I do when I think about this, I go back to 2008 and the financial meltdown as the moment that created 2011 on Occupy Wall Street. And Occupy Wall Street was an unfocused thing, but it was an important thing. And it was driven by a lot of the same conditions and emotions and analysis that have driven the support subsequently behind both Trump and Bernie Sanders. This has been playing itself out for a while.
Do you think any of that might have been different if Obama had handled 2008 differently?
Yeah.
You do?
I think so. I think it was important that because institutions were too big to fail, the people who ran them were too big to jail. And that just didn't wash. And I heard something recently that was really interesting because, in a wonkish kind of way, I put numbers on it. But it was that, that 1% of people who were involved in it and enriched by it, and that class of people who could survive in a knowledge economy and so on, and information, recovered from the 2008 meltdown in half the time that ordinary people did, homeowners with mortgages and who'd seen their investments go up in smoke and so on. That's a big, big difference in perspective that grows up over years, right?
Yeah. So I was talking yesterday I texted yesterday to a friend of mine in California who was very involved in the Harris campaign, and he didn't have time to get back to me immediately because he was meeting with Gavin Newsom. So I guess life just moves on.
Oh, it's too soon for me to think about Gavin Newsom. I don't know. There's so many. I don't want to divert the whole conversation.
Anyway, Keith, you've been our intrepid correspondent through this whole thing. We're now having our sum up conversation. What do you want to leave people with about this?
Oh, man. I don't really know yet. I'm trying because I'm going to write something for the weekend. And I had a lot of ideas about what that should be. I don't like to give it away, but I'll tell you, one of the ones that's drifting through my mind is that America has been through a lot of very, very trying circumstances in its history. And this is not even the worst of them. And it makes its way out of them. They have gone through, like something that I'm toying with is a book I read a couple of summers ago called Fever in the Heartland, which was about how the Ku Klux Klan in Indiana essentially took over that state. The administration of the state, the media of the state, the churches of the state, all of it. And without giving it away, an event happens, a criminal event happens that discredits the leadership. And the fever breaks like that. It's gone. And it never resurfaces. And I should have put this in context. Indiana, surprisingly, was the state in the firmest grip of the Ku Klux Klan. Did I even say that at the beginning of this? That's the whole point. I mean, people think of the Ku Klux Klan as being, born in Georgia, raised in Georgia, and existing in Georgia and the Deep South. No, Indiana was where it had the most control of institutions of democracy. And the fever broke and it went away, never to return. And the book was written 2 years ago, in part as just an historical tale that's interesting, but in large part as an encouragement to people to believe that this moment can pass. And it's uplifting, in spite of its really gruesome details. It's an uplifting book. I think that's where I am. I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay as much attention to this as I did to the first administration. I already find it really, really hard just to listen to the news. I'm done. But that's probably going to be a temporary thing. I don't know. But I do believe that America will get through this. I know a lot of American people I love. And there is a tendency, and I've fallen into it myself sometimes, to think that we are in Canada have to put up with the crack house next door. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's what the appropriate analogy is, even though so many of them voted for Trump this time. I still think it's more like having a nice family next door that you do a lot of stuff with, you have a lot of common with, you have a lot of fun with them, your kids play together, but there's an abusive person in the house. You don't desert them. You don't ridicule them. You love them more than ever because they've got to get through this tough moment.
Well, they're not bad people, and they're not Nazis. And I mean, you're probably more likely to find somebody in small town America.
At some point, the Nazis were Nazis. That's the problem.
You drive through small town America, you're probably more likely to find somebody that will help you change your tire than you would in San Francisco.
Yeah. Right. There are other things you find in San Francisco.
Anyway.
I don't know. Yeah. I have very strong feelings about America. I lived there for so long and I loved it. There's a lot to recommend that country, and they do stand for something that's really important in the development of mankind and in the development of civilization.
There's a band called LCD Sound System that had a song that went, "America, I love you, but you're dragging me down."
I'm downloading it.
Yeah, that's kind of how we feel. All right, Keith, thank you so much for this and for your writing throughout the campaign. I've just loved it and loved being associated with you.
Thank you for having me.
Bring a great perspective.
On this seventh occasion.
On this seventh occasion. And on the 8th, by God, we will not be talking about this, hopefully. Something else. We'll find something else to talk about for your 8th.
So good to see you, David.
Good to see you, too. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN Rail, Forestry for the Future, and Fidelity Investments Canada. I really want to thank Keith again for all the work he did, and I want to thank you, Herle Burlyites, for watching and listening and for reading Keith's stuff throughout the campaign. And listen, have a good week, and we'll all make it. And we'll see you next week with more Herle Burly. Take care of yourselves.
Herle Burly. Herle Burly.